It's a joy to be here with all of you, and our topic today is the trickster. And I thought the easiest way to do this would be with a PowerPoint presentation going back and forth with me and questions. And why don't we begin with the PowerPoint? Because I want to start with what the trickster really is. And then I'm going to go on to the purpose the trickster seems to have in our movement toward individuation on our journey through life to integrate the various energies in us. And I'll also be spending some time on the god Hermes, who is the trickster in the Greek mythology. And I also want to spend some time on how the trickster figures in to the very important process of our letting go of our inflated ego, our deflating it to, shall we say, human divine size. So let's begin with my sharing the screen, and I hope you'll let us know if you have a problem seeing this. Everybody okay with seeing? Okay, so in case you're interested, the book of mine that goes into the topic of the trickster is called The Power of Coincidence: How Life Shows Us What We Need to Know. And of course, this book is on synchronicity. So let's begin with the dictionary definition of trickster. A dishonest person who defrauds others by trickery, the practice of crafty, underhanded ingenuity to deceive or cheat. And then second definition, a cunning or deceptive character appearing in various forms in the folklore of many cultures. And that second one is the one we'll be concentrating on the most. So it's someone who takes advantage of us. This is the con man, the snake oil salesman, the person who hoodwinks us. And as we're going to see, we can take that experience and we can turn it into something that's valuable for us. So, the characteristics of the trickster are that it sometimes takes animal form. I'll talk more about that as we go along. He is mischievous, greedy, selfish. He tricks gods and people and often helps us. Examples of the animal versions are the coyote among the Native Americans, the spider in African folklore, the monkey in China. Loki is the Norse god, who's the equivalent of Hermes in Greek myths. And Prometheus is also an example of a trickster. He's the one who gave us the gift of fire. Now here's Jung, the figure of the trickster. He is a forerunner of the Savior, and like him, God and man and animal all at once. He is both subhuman and superhuman, bestial and divine, and his chief and most alarming characteristic is his unconsciousness. In other words, the danger is in not recognizing this trickster energy in ourselves or in the people we meet up with. And that picture on the right has kind of an intimidating feeling to it. I wanted to be sure to include that because in our culture, the trickster is shown as a cartoon character mostly. And I did want to bring in that this archetype has a sinister dimension. In fact, it's a feature of the shadow side. And that too is dangerous to the extent that we keep it hidden from ourselves and project it onto others. Or we can be at the mercy of the shadow when we are not also in touch with our archetypes of protection. So, since we're using this word archetype, I put this together and we'll just go through it. An archetype is a feature of human nature, a natural inclination, like an instinct in an animal. It's an energy we inherited from the human collective. An archetype becomes visible in our human experiences, attitudes, behaviors. It's actually an organizing principle of our life choices and of our sense of our own identity. An archetype is often a hidden force or motivation behind our decisions. An archetype works best when we keep it conscious. Then we relate to it. When it remains unconscious, it can possess us, rule us, control us, harm us, and others. So an example of an archetype is mother, father, king, queen, shadow or villain, hero, God, angel, saint, demon. In fact, there are as many archetypes as there are people. So one kind of archetype is like a character. That's our trickster archetype. And another kind of archetype is an event, especially an initiatory event. For instance, being born again, that would be an archetype. Moving from death to life, that's an archetype. Ascension, resurrection, transfiguration. So sometimes it's an event and sometimes it's has a personal look. And I'm going to check with you on questions shortly. So here's a quote from James Hollis. The trickster is the little devil, that not literally, the little devilish character, say, that causes us to forget what we intended to remember, that disrupts the flow of daily life as we would have it. We might say that the trickster is the personification of the absolute autonomy of nature. We personify it as coyote, fox, hare, imp, devil. If we can image it, we can then begin to establish some conscious relationship to it. So that's the advantage of seeing it in some form like animal or person, or evil angel like Lucifer. It is most autonomous, most likely disruptive to the expected order of things when it operates unconsciously in our lives. So we're seeing this over and over again, that as long as something is unconscious, as long as we either keep ourselves unaware or just find ourselves unaware, we're at the mercy of this kind of an archetype. And this is from my book, The Power of Coincidence. The trickster character in stories dupes and is duped, gets into trouble and out of it too, shuffles chance and mischance, so you can't tell the difference, shows the hero his dark side, has irresistible charm, is spontaneous and unpredictable. He is a comic or a jinx who employs art, artifice, sedition, and dishonesty. The trickster energy appears in unexpectedness, mischief, disorder, shock, amorality. He balances rigid and righteous attitudes with humor and flexibility. And we've seen this kind of character in plays and films, in books, in myths. All of this kind of energy is likewise in ourselves. The Marx Brothers are an example of personifications of the trickster. They relish the disruption of the status quo, turning the ordinary world into chaos, everything topsy-turvy. Although they may not change during the course of their journeys, their world and its inhabitants, namely ourselves, are transformed by their antics. The trickster uses laughter to make characters see the absurdity of their situation, and thereby perhaps force a change. So there's something about meeting up with those who see the world upside down and bring out the humor in such a way that we laugh. There's something about that laughter that could help us change. What does change mean? That we move from being ruled by our own self-centered ego into a new way of living, which is one that has integrity and loving kindness and a sense of service to the world around us. Sometimes acting as a magician, the trickster directly reshapes the surrounding world with inner magic, continually weaving old into new. But the trickster can often also act as a kind of holy fool, working behind a ridiculous facade to perform these strange changes unknown and unnoticed. See the little dog trying to warn the foolish trickster that he's too close to the edge of the cliff and he can fall if he keeps looking up. So from Jung's collected works, this is his section on the trickster. As the marks of deepest unconsciousness fall away from him, instead of acting in a brutal, savage, stupid, and senseless fashion, the trickster's behavior becomes quite useful and sensible. In other words, ultimately helping us. Only out of disaster can the longing for the Savior arise. Savior, the one who helps us. In other words, the recognition and unavoidable integration of the shadow create such a harrowing situation that nobody but a savior can undo the tangled web of fate. Everything depends on the development of consciousness. This gradually brings liberation from imprisonment in unconsciousness and is therefore a bringer of light as well as of healing. Once again, we see the move from unconscious to conscious. We'll be checking in on that as we go along. So in addition to there being a personal unconscious, as we know, there's also a collective unconscious. This is what we inherited from our human background, and that's called collective trickster energy. That can produce a kind of what looks like a leader. He's really the great pretender. And he's come along at various times in history. He will convince at least half or most of the population of a nation by pandering to the basest elements of the human shadow. What are these basest elements of the negative shadow? Greed, hate, and ignorance. He will speak directly to what in Buddhism are called the three poisons. Greed, can't get enough and can't share, hate, and ignorance. All three of these are in every person. The great pretender has the skill of promising that he will put into policy the greed, hateful division, and ignorance that he knows is in the people who vote for him. After his downfall, there will be collective post-traumatic stress, both among those who supported him and those who didn't support him. This post-traumatic stress can be healed by our going through a collective grief process and a collective rebuilding of the nation and its democratic ideals. Or after his downfall, there can be civil division, violence, and conspiracy theories. So as you can see, this trickster energy is very scary unless we bring it out into the open and try to work with it, which is our topic today. The collective, the trickster who operates on the collective level, he makes promises, but he doesn't always deliver. He promises truth, but he delivers lies. He promises that we'll be the greatest among the nations, but actually he lowers our status among the nations. He promises law and order, but actually he brings lawlessness and chaos. He promises prosperity for all, but actually he brings riches to himself and his donors, not to everyone. He promises unity, but he creates division. He promises that he will eliminate the people or groups that are already mistrusted by society, the people we look down on. He promises he'll keep them out. But what he delivers is injustice toward them openly and secretly. He promises democracy, but he delivers dictatorship. He promises a wall to protect us, but he puts up walls everywhere between us. And this type of person has come along over and over again, both in the course of our lifetime and in the history of humanity. So it must be that there's something about this trickster energy that is enduring, that is ongoing, and that we always would have to keep our eye out to make sure we were not hoodwinked by it. Okay, so I want to open it up to some questions that you might have so far. So if you just want to raise your hand, Jim, go ahead and unmute, Jim.
Dave, I'm thinking of someone.
Okay.
In response
I didn't want to mention any names.
Pardon?
I didn't want to mention any names, but
no. Yeah, anyway, but it seems like you perfectly described our current situation, politically anyway, and maybe it's more than politically. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a question.
No, I get what you're saying.
Okay. I'll let somebody else ask.
Mallory?
Yeah, hi. So
Hi.
did
Nice
you
to see you.
consciously, hi, thank you for this. Did you consciously or unconsciously have Trump in mind during this whole thing?
I had Trump in mind.
Because you nailed it perfectly, I think.
Yeah, thank you. It's not that hard to do. Patricia, did you have your hand up?
I think
Tina? You want to unmute Tina?
Yeah.
By the way, Tina is a wonderful teacher of the Jungian, should we call it psychology? Seems like it's more than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, you wanted to make a comment or have a question?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. Thank you for all that you brought together. I too had someone in mind, and I was really appreciating that you didn't name it from the outset, because, as you said at the very end, you painted it as an archetype that appears and reappears many, many times throughout history on the outer stage and on the inner stage. And so the idea that, as you said, we need to keep an eye out for it, because one of the major characteristics that you told us about, reminded us of, is the unconscious aspect of it. And so, with the Fool and the Marx Brothers and, the beneficent side is that it turns our pompousness or our rigidities or whatever on their heads. And that was the promise that this particular political individual made in draining the swamp. But what people were not expecting, although many of us were when we plunged into a bit of a depression after the election, was that it would be a descent into the unconscious.
Yes.
So I really appreciate the way you're framing it and what you're giving us. Thank you. The reminders.
Yeah.
It's not just one individual by a long shot.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And there'll be many more to come after him.
Yes, and 70 million votes, and it's quite amazing. Yeah, thank you.
So Tina's also reminding us that the trickster energy is sometimes in the people we see on the news or the people we meet up with in life. I'll go into that further as we go along. But we also want to be aware that we have that same kind of energy in ourselves. Sometimes we trip others, and sometimes we're tripped. That's what I meant when I said he's duped and is duped. it's not just that we meet up with the trickster. Sometimes, without even realizing it, we are deceiving others. You're especially deceiving others when you project a certain persona and can't admit that there's something else going on in you that's not portrayed by your way of appearing in the world. And we should be afraid of that part, because since it's unconscious, it can cause harm to ourselves or others. I am thinking of a poem by Emily Dickinson in which she describes this very well. So I'll share the poem and then I'll go back and comment on it. I don't think there are any words I need to explain at the beginning. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place, far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost than the interior confronting that cooler host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, than unarmed oneself encounter in lonesome place. Ourself, behind ourself, concealed, should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment be horror's least. The body borrows a revolver and bolts the door, or looking a superior specter or more. So we think the danger is in that shadow figure or trickster who's trying to break into our apartments. But scarier than that would be to have the trickster or shadow inside yourself so unknown, so disavowed, so repressed, which is the nature of it, that we just keep projecting instead of acknowledging it in ourselves. Ourself behind ourself should startle most. In other words, the scariest thing is the unknown part of ourselves that we haven't tried to, through active imagination, try to activate, such as in working with our dreams or our projections, so that we would find out how much of this energy is in us, rather than always imagining it's in people outside of us. Everybody got the concept? And by the way, I have I gave another talk here at our club that on the shadow, and it is a YouTube. And there's also one with Jude and myself on synchronicity. And this one will be on YouTube also. So if you want to look further into this, you can check that out. Okay, any other comments before we move on? Okay.
Would you read the poem just one more time, or is there not enough time to do that?
Yes, I can.
I'd appreciate that.
Sure. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost, than the interior confronting that cooler host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, than unarmed oneself encounter in lonesome place. Ourself behind ourself concealed should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment be horror's least. The body borrows a revolver and bolts the door, or looking a superior specter or more. Specter is a ghost, something that's in us but hidden. Okay, so let's move on because the next characteristic is that the trickster has an important purpose in the experience of individuation. He helps deflate our inflated ego. In other words, he cuts us down to size, and he shows us that we're not all we're cracked up to be. So let's get some examples of that. First, this kind of summarizes it. The trickster is the ego demolitions expert who helps us become more realistic about our psychological limitations and ultimately our spiritual limitlessness. So not only are we seeing where we're limited, we're seeing where we're beyond limits. That's our divine nature, human divine nature. That's who we are. This is an energy within ourselves and within the universe that humbles us, topples our ego, upsets our plans, demonstrates to us how little our wishes matter, and dissolves the forms that no longer serve us, though we may be clinging to them for dear life. He comes to the entrenched to release spontaneity and thus restore psychic balance, thwarts our careful plans, creates inner and outer upheavals, induces or forces us into new versions of ourselves, topples thrones and supplants the royal ego. The trickster is the lord of topsy-turvy, the hand that pushed Humpty Dumpty to his great fall. Yet, though his visits feel like plagues, they are gifts in the long run. If we, kind of work with this energy and learn from it. So our topic now is how the trickster helps us deflate our overly inflated ego so that an ego self axis can occur, which is individuation. Let's take this short speech from Richard II. He died at age 33. He lost his throne to Bolingbroke, who would become Henry IV. And contemplating his fading, ultimately meaningless power, he said this. I'll recite it and then I'll come back and explain. Within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king, keeps death his court, and there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath a little seen, to monarchize, be feared, and kill with looks, infusing him with self and vain conceit, as if this flesh which walls about our life were brass impregnable, and humored thus comes at the last, and with a little pin bores through his castle wall, and farewell king. So he had all the power and he lost it. And it was the little antic, that's the joker, the court fool, the trickster. Notice instead of saying the open crown, so you have a gold circlet and the center of it is empty, instead of saying the open crown, he says the hollow crown, because it's a hollow form of power. What is a hollow form of power? The ego. What is the ego? The part of us that thinks it's in full control, that it's entitled to special treatment, and that its arrogance has no cost to it. That everybody has to bow down to my greatness. So he says, there's a crown around my head, but I'm a very mortal person. I'm not going to last very long. In fact, death is the true king of my court. And in this court of death, the trickster is sitting. He's looking at my regal state and scoffing it. He's looking at all my pomp and circumstance, and he's grinning at it. He's the one who allows me a lifetime. He's the one who allows me the little scene that I'm in. He's the one that lets me act as a ruler. He's the one who makes me look scary to other people and gives me the power to kill someone just by looking at him. In fact, he's filling me with selfishness and vanity, and I'm acting as if my flesh, which is like a little wall around my heart and soul, he makes me think that it's made of brass, that it has no vulnerability to it. He's humoring me. And someday, when the last day of my life comes, the last day of my ersatz power arrives. Ersatz because I think it's permanent, and it isn't. And he'll just take out a little pin and he will burst the bubble of my greatness. The little pin will make it through the castle wall, no matter how thick. And then it's goodbye to me and all my power. Could there be a more powerful description of the trickster? But Shakespeare has done it. In Romeo and Juliet, when Juliet awakes from sleep, thinking that the plan that they made to reunite her with Romeo is indeed moving along, the monk has seen that Romeo is now dead, and he says, "A greater power than we can contradict hath thwarted our intents. A power greater than our ego, one that we can't argue with, took our intentions and destroyed them." Or another way of putting it from Robert Burns, "The best laid schemes of mice and men gang aft agley, oft go wrong, and leave us naught but grief and pain for promised joy." So these are all examples of the shadow energy shown through the trickster, that we had everything set up, but it was really a house of cards and it was easily toppled. What is happening here? We're learning from the universe in archetypal ways how limited is our own power, let alone expectations. So, the god of The god that represents the trickster in our Western view is Hermes. So I'm going to say a little bit about him now. But first, I'm just going to check in again if there are any questions or comments.
Yes.
Mallory?
I have a bunch, and you can just tell me when to stop. But is there anything? Is there a conscious trickster energy? Is one question.
Is there a what?
Conscious. Can you have trickster
yes,
energy consciously?
Yes, that would be the snake oil salesman.
Okay, but then is it really conscious? They know what they're doing, but is it motivated by consciousness or by unconscious trickster energy to be? So the other part of that question is, are all negative, harmful trickster acts behavior acts of unconsciousness and trickster acts, even if they know that they're taking advantage of somebody? Would it still be considered unconscious if consciousness is actually a good energy? Does that make sense?
Okay, I think the way I would look at it is this, that the snake oil salesman who knows that what he's selling has no value, he is purposely hoodwinking the audience. The audience, they are unconscious of what's going on because they have been tricked by a promise that there is something, an elixir of some kind, that will help me, and I don't have to do anything for it except pay my dollar. So I've been tricked by my own greed and self-deception that there's something that can help me that's external. On the other hand, you have the kind of trickster who doesn't realize that what he's selling or what he's proposing won't work. And so that's still a trickster because some type of deception is occurring, but it's unconscious both to the perpetrator and the victim. So sometimes it's only the victim that's unconscious, and sometimes it's both.
But my question is, just the act of being a trickster, wouldn't that be considered an unconscious archetype anyway? Even if they know that they're doing that, it's still under the realm of, it's all unconscious. And when you're describing that quote from Shakespeare, when you're saying ego, it sounded like you were equating ego with narcissism, but isn't healthy ego an important thing to conscious individuation and awareness?
Yes, thank you for making that distinction. It's the inflated ego that Shakespeare was describing, not the healthy ego, which is our sense of agency and which sets goals based on intelligent assessments and then tries to fulfill them. That's our healthy ego. We don't want to get rid of that at all, but we do want to cut down to size the part of us that overdoes it.
The inflated part. And so the last question is, and I don't know the answer to this one either, are all tricksters narcissists?
No, not necessarily. You'll see that as we go along. I'm going to give some examples.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Sure. Yeah,
David?
other questions?
Yes, I have one here, David.
Yeah,
You had mentioned the court jester and the fool.
yes.
That the archetypes, but the nice thing about being the court jester is you can speak the truth without hopefully losing your head.
Yeah, that was the whole concept, that there's somebody in the court who's allowed to tell it like it is.
It's the jester with the classic hat, or it's
Yeah,
Saturday
and
Night
he's
Live,
the
or if
trickster.
it's the Marx Brothers.
Yes.
So is that actually part of the
Another
trickster,
feature.
or is it just
Another feature
Less
of
evil
the
one.
Trickster, as we'll see when we get our examples, is one who is not deceiving. He is telling you the truth, but you probably won't believe it, although you might. Okay. All right, so let me go back to, now we're going to talk about Hermes. I just want to give a little introduction to the next slide. In ancient times, there was an annual religious festival. It took place in the ancient Greek city of Tanagra. It consisted of having a young man carry a ram on his shoulders as he led a procession around the outside perimeter of the city. And the residents followed him, carrying flowers and burning incense. This ritual recalled how Hermes did exactly this when Tanagra was once besieged by its enemies. And Hermes was their patron god. He dressed as a simple shepherd. He carried an actual ram around the city, and wherever he walked, he created safety. He thereby showed the people that he was their ally in any battle they might encounter, and he was their protector in any danger, and especially in that moment in which they needed him. Of course, it doesn't take much to think of Jesus looking for the lost sheep and carrying it back to the flock on his shoulders. So it's important to see that the trickster god also has a protective kind of energy. So this is Jesus as the good shepherd, and you see the connection to the prior picture. This is a statue from early Christian times. See, Jesus was first pictured as a youth when he was in the archetype of Apollo, the god of the sun, whose birthday is December 25th. But when Christianity moved toward the style of the emperors in Constantinople, he was pictured with a beard, looking the way we see him now. But this is the original way he looked. Here is Hermes on the left, and he is helping Orpheus and Eurydice move from the underworld back into the conscious worlds, the daylight world. Although, as you know, it didn't really work out because Orpheus turned and looked at Eurydice, even though Hermes had warned him, if you look at her, she will be lost forever and stay in the underworld. But it's important to see that the one who is the trickster is also the one who moves us from death to life. So this picture is by Tintoretto, and it's from Renaissance times. I'll explain it. Hermes is the one with the red clothing. He's holding the infant Dionysus, and he is placing the infant on the breast of Hera, the queen of the gods. He is doing this so that the baby Dionysus will become half human, half divine. So if you receive the milk of a goddess when you are an infant, you are instantly turned into a man god. So that's what Hermes the trickster is doing. He tricked Hera into, by appealing to her compassion. He said, this baby has no mother, would you suckle him? And Hera said yes. But after the baby had just taken a few drops of the milk, so now he's already divine, Hera looked more carefully and she saw that this was the bastard son of her husband, Jupiter or Zeus. So she instantly pulled the baby off her breast. And when she did, the more milk spurted out, which became what we call the Milky Way. And you see the stars above and around her arm? That's the origin of the Milky Way. But Hermes is the one who tricks someone into helping us find our divine nature. This is Hermes holding the infant Dionysus. It's a beautiful image, such grace in the way that they're presented to us, and such a sense of serenity. We are that infant when we work with this positive side of the shadow, of the trickster archetype. So now let's look at what I've called the great reversal. A central feature of the trickster is that he disguises himself as someone very lowly, unlike in the story of Hermes, in which he's a god. But here he's in disguise. He looks like someone lowly, but this lowly person overcomes the so-called great person. I'll give some examples. Great person here means an inflated ego. So this is a reversal of the way we would usually think of it. We would think that the great should help the lowly, but everything is reversed, as you will see. And in our culture, this is shown by mostly in cartoon characters. So let's begin with this picture. Of course, this is Goldilocks. The psyche seeks balance, a combination of opposites, rather than staying put in one extreme. The transcendent function of the psyche finds the midpoint, the third option between the two opposites. This is where they combine. And this can only happen when the time is right, that is, in synchronicity. That's where the trickster meets us, in synchronicity. In a way, not enough. See, this is the porridge that was cold. Not enough, or too much, this is the porridge that was too hot, are the trickster. The extremes are how we get tricked. We think we should choose one of the extremes. That's a trick. But they could also guide us to the center, which is always where the great individuation happens. And in that center, which is a combination of heat and coldness together, produced the warm porridge that Goldilocks is enjoying. So on one side, she saw there was not enough heat. On the other, she saw too much heat. And in the center was just right. The trickster is trying to point us to the just right, but does so sometimes by forcing us into what is either too much or too little. And of course, this applies all over the place. In life, well, it reminds us of what Aristotle said about virtue. Virtue is always in the middle. It's never virtuous to be in the realm of too much or not enough. It happens in the middle. Give a simple example. Too much courage is foolhardiness. Such daring could somehow wound us. Or you could be too cautious, not enough courage, in which case you're going to be stuck and keep yourself safe rather than go on the journey of a lifetime. But courage is in the middle, just right. Not too much, so you don't overdo it. Not too little, so you underdo it. Just right. I want a relationship in which there's not too much closeness, and I want one where I don't want one where there's not enough. I want just right. You can apply this to anything. But the important thing to notice is that the psyche is doing this on its own. It's looking for balance. It's looking for ways to take these opposites and find something right in the middle that comes up through them. Goldilocks is a good example of it. So lowly characters continually humble the imperious ones. The trickster is the archetype of that comeuppance. I'm now going to give some examples. We have certainly noticed in our own lives how persons and events keep coming along to depose our ego's arrogance, to show us how little in control we really are, to strip us of our imaginary entitlements, to disrupt our best laid schemes. Such people and events are trickster visits, more assisting forces on our path, but they may look like they're afflicting forces. Tina, do you have to leave now, or are you going to be able to stay? Or
Well, I would, and Steve and I mentioned this to Dave. I just managed to get an appointment for my first COVID vaccine. Actually, it's today at 4:30, and I've been looking online for weeks. So I've been really looking forward to your talk, Dave, and I'm loving it. And I was going to have to leave at 3:30, so I should probably sneak away quietly now just to, tend to the group and what you're doing.
Oh, no problem. Is there anything that you would like to throw in that you would add that I haven't gone into yet, although I do have more to go into?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I love how you're you're giving us a large frame to begin with that's quite archetypal. In other words, historical throughout all time, classical and contemporary in terms of leaders, whether they be political ones or spiritual ones or what have you. And then the reminder that it's going on in us all the time, the way we forget what we want to remember, the way we trick ourselves and therefore trick each other when we think sometimes we're being genuine and not necessarily purposefully. I really liked the reflection of one of the people who again was playing off of their images of the Marx Brothers, because this is a primary role of comedians, is to turn everything on its head. And I know a number of comedians and actors who are hysterically funny and underneath very often very serious people with very grave concerns and often a certain amount of depression, because they're not completely, but they're connected to something of depth. And in my experience, they're holding a lesson for the collective and they're trying to get that across. And laughter is medicine. So people take it. We're uncomfortable when it comes our way because it holds a mirror and forces us to see ourselves, but we need it. And so we go to the comedian. I remember going to the other cafe right up the block here to see Robin Williams when he was first getting started. And we were in hysterics and we went out thinking about our lives, So I'm glad this is going to be on YouTube, because the personal aspect of what you might see in your life or, confidentially, generally speaking, what your clients stumble into in themselves and their own dreams, maybe, and in their relationships, how that gets projected. It's the other one's fault, so often because we're tricking ourselves. That's a huge ground to cover. You may not be going, into your clinical work. I don't know. I don't think you need to, but I'm just thinking of the personal aspect and all the ways that we just hoodwink ourselves and get into such a fix. And sometimes it's the humor. If someone else is capable of coming in at that angle that can get us to laugh at ourselves again. And somatically, as you know, laughter is deep, deep body work. It just breaks up all the muscular armoring that holds our identity in place, So that's a particular benefit. And as you mentioned, the Hopi clowns, they would stand on their head, they would flap their skirts, they would do the outrageous thing, and people would be in hysterics, and then they would be open to a message. So anyway, these are some things that come to mind.
So you're more likely to let the wisdom come through when you've broken up some of your inner armature.
Yes, we hold on to it so dearly. So people who are doing trickstery things consciously can be highly skilled. If a comedian flops, it's very, very painful. For me, they get close to something, but they can't quite hit the mark. And then it becomes deeply personal about that dear individual who's trying to do something. But when there's a certain level of irony, or if they can tolerate paradox in their own lives or whatever, they can kind of pull it off because they go to the core of something. And it usually means, at least in the comedians I know, that they've suffered a fair amount, or they can't offer the gift, the dark gift.
That fits.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you're bringing that in. Thank you.
Thank you. This is also so timely, as I know because
Yeah.
we're all in PTSD recovery. So that's going to take some time, but holding the lantern is such a big part of it. So thank you very much for making it more accessible for all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. See you
All right.
later, Dave. We'll
See you
we'll be
later.
in touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll email. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. This is
Thank you,
wonderful.
Tina.
Yeah. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We talked about deflation. That is the ego that's overblown in its sense of entitlement, arrogance, being controlling. And of course, we remember the proverb from the Bible, pride goeth before the fall. So there's something about the hubris in us that forecasts a fall. It'll definitely happen. And the trickster is the person who came along in your life and helped that happen, gave you some kind of a comeuppance. It felt painful when it was happening, but ultimately it was helping you. The trickster, for instance, in a relationship, that would be the person who fooled you, the woman or man who betrayed you, the predator who used you, the shyster who took your money. It's something, someone, some event that turned your life upside down, showed you how vulnerable you were, how you were not all you were cracked up to be. And humor, irony, paradox, they're the tools of the trickster. A pretty face could be a trickster because you followed a pretty face thinking that will bring me happiness and there's no actual connection. Alcohol and drugs are the trickster. Romantic attachment is a trickster. Sexual desire can be a trickster. They absorb our energy. They direct our choices. They fool us into making mistakes. And we're seduced into believing that any of these could give us permanent happiness or increase our personal stature. We might even say that the trickster makes the same promises that the serpent made to Eve when this whole human enterprise began. A personal crisis could be a trickster visit. So now let's look at the topic that we just started to look at, which is how small helps or overcomes big. And I just want to begin with a passage from the Magnificat, the poem written by or presented by the Virgin Mary in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 1. He has pulled down the mighty from their thrones. He has exalted the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has sent the rich away empty. In other words, God has reversed everything in this new order. And that's the trickster energy. And as you will see, cartoon characters do the same kind of thing. So I'm going to do a share screen. And we just talked about how the lowly characters humble the imperious ones. Look at this quotation from St. Paul from the Bible. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things, even the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. That's a perfect description of this aspect of the shadow. It's also kind of a invitation into hope, because we realize you don't have to be wise, you don't have to be influential, you don't have to be noble in birth, you don't have to be above everybody. There's something in the higher self or God that still calls you and can have you be an instrument of help to the universe, even though you have so little to offer by human standards. The little mouse continually overcomes the big cat. Both Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner are trickster figures. Whether constructing or evading various elaborate traps and tricks, both Roadrunner and Coyote are forever locked in a trickerish dance, each striving to use his wits, finally to emerge victorious. Though he struggles to use his cunning to defeat Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote is continually foiled by fate and by his opponent's speed. So a coyote mammal is higher in the chain of being than a bird reptile, but yet over and over again, it's reversed. That's how the trickster deflates the ego. Brer Rabbit is a recurring character from African American folktale who uses his wits. Here's the little mouse. Oh, wait, let me go back a minute. He uses his wit to outsmart Brer Fox and Brother Fox and Brother Bear. Originally, this was a Cherokee trickster. Brer Rabbit was appropriated into the African oral tradition. A more contemporary rabbit, that would be Bugs Bunny, also continually evades his tormentors through foolish deceptions, disguises, and verbal trickery. Rascally rabbits exemplify the wily nature of the trickster. So Elmer Fudd is a human, so is Yosemite Sam. They're on the chain of being way above a rabbit, which is a rodent, but yet Bugs Bunny wins every time. Something is trying to show us that reversal helps you know yourself better. When you're stuck in your persona, you don't find out who you are. It's the little trickster character who shows you. Sometimes this little character helps you. So in the Aesop's fable, the lion catches the mouse, is ready to eat him, when the mouse says, "Don't eat me, let me go, and someday I will help you." The lion says, "I'm the king of the jungle. I don't need help from a little mouse." He says, "No, trust me. Give me a chance." He releases the mouse, and someday when the lion is trapped by the human hunters, the mouse comes along and gnaws the rope to set him free. So little helps big. Prometheus gave us the gift of fire and was punished by the gods for doing so. He tricked the gods into giving us a gift that was supposed to come from them. Moses, placed in a basket by his sister Miriam, floating down the Nile, just a helpless infant who someday became the liberator of his people. David, just a teenager, kills Goliath. Little overcomes big. Judith cuts off the head of the king Holofernes to save her people. It's from the Hebrew Bible. That's a painting by Caravaggio. Book of Isaiah, chapter 11, a little child shall lead them. Jesus, the infant, but look, a king is kneeling down in front of him. The three wise men, the magi, the magicians, they are acknowledging the infant. So the great adore the small. And notice that it's the female, the divine mother energy that presents the little God to the world. St. George, a human, but yet he kills the dragon. A witch with many powers, but yet ultimately she's overcome by little Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. When Dorothy throws water on the witch, this is what the witch says. Oh, what a world, what a world. I'm melting, I'm melting. Who would have thought a good little girl like you could destroy all my beautiful power? She summarized the trickster energy. So here the trickster, who is the witch, wants to overcome the human, but later the human overcomes the witch. So she's tricked because she didn't realize that a human could destroy her power. So in our personal life, we go back and forth as tricksters to one another. Sometimes we don't even realize. Remember what Dorothy said, oh, I didn't mean it. I was just trying to help the scarecrow. You set him on fire. I didn't realize I was the trickster. That's what Dorothy's saying. So sometimes we don't realize we're the trickster to others. Here's the court. Here are the lawyers with all their training. Here is the judge with all his training. But it's the little people. It's the jury of 12 people off the street. They're the ones who will make the big decision. Everything is reversed. It would seem like big decisions should be made by those who are trained that way. But no, it isn't like that. The big decision is made by those with no training at all in the legal world. Dorothy is, Alice. Alice is tricked by the white rabbit. She finds it quite unusual that a rabbit could talk and is even dressed. She follows him down the rabbit hole In other words, she goes down into her own inner life, into her own unconscious by following the trickster energy. So one of the wonderful qualities of the trickster is that he can bring us into our own inner darkness. And there we find out that we can be bigger than we thought we were or smaller. And we encounter characters who help us see both our limits and our gifts. One of these tricksters will be the Cheshire Cat, following the white rabbit down into the depths of our surprising unknown self. And we can ask, who has been that rabbit or rabbits to me in my life? How far into myself did I follow the trickster? Where is the trickster now? Where am I now? Alice asked the cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice added as an explanation. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat, "if you only walk long enough." So in this little conversation, now the cat gives very tricky answers, but ultimately he's helping because he's recommending follow your nose on your human journey. You don't need to turn to an authority to find out how to go or where to go. You have that in yourself. You're sure to do that. You have the power to go on the journey. All you have to do is walk. That's actually the same statement as, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Long as I walk, I will feel accompanied by the assisting forces, of which the cat was one. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to some questions. Does anybody have a question or a comment that you'd like to make?
May I go?
Yes. Hi.
Oh, right. I was struck especially by that that sentence by Alice. I don't much care where.
Yeah.
That's kind of alarming to me.
Well, remember, she's in the world of the unconscious, so everything there is somehow useful. I can meet a Mad Hatter, a Dormouse, a Duchess, a Queen of Hearts, Knaves of Hearts, and so King of Hearts, and so forth, all the characters. They will all show me parts of myself. So it doesn't really matter which way I go, because everything down here tells me something about me.
So there aren't necessarily truly malevolent figures, only teachers.
Ultimately, it's all teaching. Yeah.
Okay.
There are some evil characters in the world, as we certainly know.
Mm-hmm.
But in the stories of the trickster, he's ultimately trying to help you find depths in yourself that you didn't know were there, especially your own self-deception.
Mm-hmm. I have more of a comment. I hope maybe you could form something out of it. But there's the fear of being by going with the deceiver and believing that they'll ultimately teach you something about yourself, that you'll be somehow lost in the thicket of the deception.
Mm. Yes.
Would you speak to maybe that?
Yeah, that you'll ultimately, you mean that you won't be able to find your way out?
Yes, that the message will be half learned, and that you'll be fully deceived.
Yes. And, we've had examples of that happening in our lives. We think that, oh, this resolves it, but it really is still up in the air. We'll see that somewhat in my next part of the topic, which is Peter Pan, a special type of trickster. Well, thank you for your comment. Bring it up again if I don't go into it the way you're looking for.
Sure.
Other questions or ideas?
This is Elaine,
Hi,
and
Elaine.
I was so taken by when you were talking about finding the middle way, of there being too much or too little. And I have been having this correspondence with my son about the internet, how to control it, and yet from the distribution of disinformation versus protecting free speech. I don't know the answer, but I know we have to find that middle way.
Mm.
Just an observation.
Well, retell them the story of Goldilocks.
I will. That's great.
Okay, Mallory?
Couple of things, of course. I think the person who asked about, do we stay deceived forever? I don't think we do. At some lifetime, at some point we wake up, but it sounds like, which I haven't kind of put into words before, that the trickster does take you to awakening.
Mm-hmm.
The timing is either up to you or not up to you, depending on how unconscious you are. But when you were talking about Dorothy, and it didn't sound to me that Dorothy was a trickster. And so the question is, when you're doing something in a positive way to save something or someone, does that still be considered a trickster? And to me, it was, and I hadn't thought about this before until you started talking, but it seems like her feminine, the feminine energy in her took the water of consciousness to destroy the negative feminine of the witch.
Yes,
of the
yes.
the mother, whatever the negative introject is. So it was kind of interesting to hear that. And then, and then the part with the three bears. I gotta do this. The part with the three bears. If you're unconsciously trying, if you're just trying to make, no, sorry, I don't know. Hold on. We make mistakes by getting too hot or too cold to land in equanimity. When, as a trickster teaching, but when you're dealing with equanimity from the Buddhist perspective, and most of us don't listen on that perspective, we have to learn it through the trickster energy.
Good point. Yes, we wouldn't have to meet up with the trickster if we worked with our spiritual practices more than we do.
So I just want to say thank you, because you were sparking so many synapse jumps in my head. I really appreciate it.
Good. Well, that's the whole idea.
Renee, I think you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi. I concur about the synapse excitation and inspiration. It's fun to be here. I guess I just was wondering about the slide a couple slides ago, Dave, about following the white rabbit. Where is he now? Where am I now? Were those just questions you were asking like for us right now? That was you.
Yeah, I thought you could take those with you, ask yourself, who's leading me more deeply into myself. That's where the rabbit was leading her.
Mm.
She found out she could be, when she talked to the caterpillar and ate part of the mushroom, she found out, oh, I'm bigger than I thought. Oh, I'm smaller than I thought. She kept finding out that her way of being in the world was limited, but that there were other options for her in herself if she would only open to them. And there are people who do that for us. They help us that way. And they could be people who deceived us in some way. We learned how to be more careful. We learned how to be stronger from them.
Yeah, that's very beautiful.
Ultimately, the trickster helped us.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yolanda?
Thank you, David. It was very affirming and consoling when you cited from the Magnificat, my soul that magnifies the Lord, and then the lowly part, because I've always considered like, oh, I don't have anything to contribute. But then you had gone to the part where all of us have something, no matter how lowly we are, we have something to contribute. And then you also went to the part where there's a passage there, as long as wherever you want to go, you just keep on going. And so it gives me a lesson of just be tenacious, be persevering, no matter how other people would cut you off, And then, so I will now ask you a question, since you cited so many biblical concepts, that there is a passage in the Bible where I would always tell my children, be pure like a dove, be wise like a serpent. Is that a cunning?
That would be a good example of the trickster, the serpent energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, she's quoting the statement of Jesus, be wise as serpents.
Be pure like a dove, be wise.
Yeah, and guileless as a dove. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, let's go back here. I'm going to do a screen sharing again. Because now I want to go into the Peter Pan style of being a trickster. So this is Peter Pan and Wendy. So this is the character who comes along in life and who promises you the moon, and who, that you notice the expression on Wendy's face. She's wondering, should I really go with this guy or what? And he does indeed take her flying. He takes her into a lot of fun experiences, but he then disappears. And he's afraid of making any full commitment. So he will come and go out of your life, and he will keep making promises that he ultimately does not keep on the level that you're looking for, which is commitment. And this is called the Peter Pan syndrome or archetype. It's also an archetype that Jung talked about called the puer, P-U-E-R. That's the Latin word for boy. And this is the man who actually is an adolescent all his life. So he has boy energy instead of man energy, man being the one who can take responsibility for his actions, can be autonomous, and can be intimate and faithful in a relationship and be there for you. But the Peter Pan can't do that. And since it's so much fun to be flying around, and you even have little Tinkerbell confirming it all, you are swept off your feet, literally, but you always notice that you're put back down into your own room and left alone while he goes God knows where. That is certainly the archetype of the trickster, specifically in some relationships. And he does not have an evil intent. It's just that he doesn't believe or can't offer more than just immediate gratification. The reason he's called Peter Pan is because he's associated with the god Pan, who is one of the trickster gods. And Pan, the animal sacred to Pan was a goat. So when J.M. Barrie wrote Peter Pan and it was shown on the stage, he had Peter Pan appear on the stage playing pan pipes, which was the instrument of music played by the god Pan, and a live goat on the stage, because he wanted to show that, you know, this archetype of the trickster. So stubborn a refusal to forget that there's such a thing as the trickster could not be an accident. This is from Paul Radin, who wrote the famous book, The Trickster. In other words, if people have always held on to a belief that there are tricksters and that we ourselves are tricksters to each other and to ourselves, it wasn't an accident. It was purposeful. It helps us see something in ourselves that we might be unconscious of. And I just think that's such a great way to put it. So stubborn a refusal to forget could not be an accident. We stubbornly held on to the belief in the trickster. We showed images of him over and over again that couldn't have just been random. It was meant to remind us of an energy that is an important part of our story. So there you go. All right, any final questions or ideas that you'd like to share? Peggy?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm very glad to be here. I just wanted to say that as a woman, it was hard to sit here and see, well, cartoon characters, of course, are fairly neutral, but so many of the trickster figures are masculine, which to me is other. So when I think of trickster, it's something out there, it's something hard for me to
Good point.
identify in myself.
Yes. It is mostly a masculine archetype, so it's not as easy to relate to. And that's a very good point.
Thank you.
Although the witch figure is
Yes.
part of is a way to look at the trickster energy.
Right.
Good. Okay, Mallory?
Well, we all have the masculine archetype in us anyway. So I don't think it's a cutoff thing. So when you're talking about, again, I said synapses went crazy. But I have one question. The more you work on yourself, is it therefore the less trickster energy you have within your ego, in your psyche?
Less likely you are to be assailed or harmed in some way. The more conscious you can be of this, that this energy is out there and in you, the less likely are you to be either possessed by it or harmed by it. Although there's no way to avoid it totally.
So that makes a lot of sense. So the Peter Pan thing, it was amazing that the picture you showed, I remembered it 100% from when I'd seen this when it came out. I mean, it was like so exactly what my brain had remembered. And also, interestingly enough, I saw it differently this time from any other time. With the puer, really, it seemed like more it was, if we're just, and I know a lot of artists and musicians like this, we just follow that puer energy without doing the grown-up masculine, taking responsibility, at the same time being able to go into that realm of let us fly, let us go into the heavens, let us create. Then you just get to the puer or the puella. But when you connect it to an integral part of your psyche that also connects with the mature part, then you get really great creativity and being able to be in the world and not just wait for somebody to take care of you.
Good point. Thank you. And Mallory used the word puella. That's the Latin word for girl, as opposed to woman. And the puella archetype is the equivalent of the Peter Pan, but from a feminine character.
Thank you, David. You this was so wonderful. I hope you come back and do another thing.
Thank you. Somebody else had a hand up?
Looks like John.
Dan and...
Oh, maybe Dan can first.
Okay, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, sure. I particularly one as you get here about who's leading me deeper into myself, or how do I do that with others, and particularly the how of it, and taking this work like in the modern analytic group, how come this is coming up now and you contextualized it in the culture. I'm also interested in stories of how each of us, and you, and I can talk about me or in a relationship or with my friends or the things I write in some of the groups I'm on in the internet, how I foster this, how I host it, where I might look for it. There was the New Yorker article about fresh experiences, how I get out of the circuits that I've used in my brain, or what I do, the physicality of opening up my body and myself to experience. So I'm particularly interested in groups like this. One of the things that's fun is to go around sometimes and in a conversation cafe, or there's even something now I use called Chatterfall, where people on the chat just write in and we just get all these ideas that might be in here, in a group of 20 people. And I see there's 45 people here. There's 600% more wisdom in a group of 20 on the research I'm familiar with than any one individual has. And in terms of how we harvest, or how I harvest or get built on or access what might be in the room and on my Zoom, this is where my curiosity comes where I find myself now at this point in the seminar.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Dan. Appreciate it. And I'm glad we're all helping each other in this. Okay, John, you had a comment?
Yes, while we were speaking, I Googled female trickster spirits, and they're almost all Asian. They're either Indian or Chinese. And so those cultures seem to have a greater abundance of female trickster deities than Western Europe. Although I can see some reasons for it being male, but you know.
Yeah. The witch in Hansel and Gretel would be an example of the female trickster. She's in a gingerbread house, which is itself a trick because children will be attracted to it, and then she will lure them in and then destroy them. So she's the archetype of the seduce and then harm.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
The sirens.
the sirens that lure sailors to their death, that is, to the death of their ego, because they're so attracted to the songs that they sing. And the songs, of course, are actually drawing them into destruction. But what the idea is, when you're, instead of staying on course on your voyage through life, you are pulled away from your serious voyage to Ithaca by the possibility of extreme pleasure offered by the sirens. So they trick you into noticing that you're not fully adult.
Dave?
Not being faithful to your journey. Lloyd?
Dave, Grimm's fairy tales is filled with trickster archetype. Almost every story, there's always a trickster. And the tricksters is always about transformation.
Mm-hmm.
That whether you're the last of the brothers or the one that they say can't do it, the failure, the outcast, the one that ruptures, it's always the trickster is the one that turns the tables on everyone. That
Yes.
The least becomes first, et cetera, you know.
Turns the table is a good way to put it.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, other ideas?
I see Jim has his hand up.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, I was just thinking of how this, how I got caught by the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, I would go down from Washington State to Santa Barbara and take one class from Mark Ferrer, who's Dave knows, and in short stories. And there were 4 classes, I think, available. And I ended up, because it's on Zoom, I stayed in Washington and ended up taking 4 classes. So I was tricked into learning a lot more. And it's been very helpful to me. So that kind of situation somehow fits for me, that the trickster helping me.
Yeah.
So that was my comment. I guess there was one other thing I was thinking of. There was a young lady that was talking about being a little afraid of a journey where you didn't have a destination. And I was thinking, in my own case, where I go for walks, for exercise, in those kind of situations, it really doesn't matter where you go, is you still, because you still are getting the exercise that is helping your body improve. And so there are situations where the destination doesn't really matter. That's about all I have to say.
Yeah,
but thank
you. And yeah, from what Jim is just saying, we're tricked into higher consciousness. That's the transformation that Floyd Freudian slip just mentioned. You're tricked into a higher consciousness. You're not tricked into destruction if you work with this kind of energy.
Or you're tricked into going through destruction to get to the higher consciousness.
Sometimes it'll be, death. It'll be the death resurrection theme. Like you're fired from a job and then you find a better one. So it looks like you lost everything, but then you find something better. That would be trickster energy. The idea of our workshop today is just to take a look at this and this phenomenon and to notice it in ourselves, to be thinking of how it happened to us in the course of our lives and how we can be on the lookout for it from now on, and that we can always trust that it has a transformative power one way or another.
So David, do you think God is the ultimate trickster?
Yes, you're reminding me of a quote. I think it's Voltaire, but I'm not sure. God is a comedian playing to an audience that's afraid to laugh.
That's good.
Okay, any other final comments before I turn it back over to Steve?
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask,
Yeah,
I find as we've gone through the seminar that I've had an easy time thinking about trickster events. They seem to be located in midlife for me. And I'm just wondering about trickster appearances in the first half of life and in the second half of life. And maybe in the second half of life, it's more of an interior experience. But anyway, it's kind of a comment and a question.
Yes, first of all, I agree that in later life, is more an interior realization that's coming through. It's not as obvious as it is in the earlier part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you are fooled. And secondly, in the second half of life, it might have more to do with the three poisons that we mentioned: greed, hate, and ignorance. Whereas in early life, it's more about pleasure, gratification, finding the answer in a bottle or in a drug or in a person or in something. And at the turning point, we're no longer fooled by any of that as much as we were before, but we are still vulnerable at that deeper internal level that still might be grasping, and that's the greed, or might be dividing, and full of biases and prejudices, that's the hate, and the ignorance is acting in accord with those two.
Thank you.
See, once you name it as trickster energy, then you evoke its transformative power. So through my greed, may I find out about my fear of giving, which goes all the way back to childhood. That's a transformative realization, which you find out interiorly in the second half of life, more likely than you would have when you were in high school.
But David,
You might have been
you're talking
perhaps in alcohol to find something and not really know what you were looking for.
But you're talking about fear. I think fear is the ultimate trickster where God's doing death and disease and cancer and diminishment of your body. I think that's the ultimate trickster is to hold that with fear.
Yes. Fear is the trickster, the bully that convinces us that we have no options. Virginia, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think that's what Trump is doing for us. He's pointing it right into he's throwing it right in our face, how racist our country has been since its very beginning.
Yes.
How greedy people are underneath it all, even when they pretend that they're
Yes.
not. And hateful and ignorant. And there's a need amongst various groups, I think it's all of us, to feel morally superior. And so we can put down the right wingers, and the right wingers can put down the left wingers, and then there's this chaos. We have to get serious.
Thank you,
Looking
Virginia.
at ourselves. Okay.
I'm glad you brought that in. Flora?
One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Jonah, and I'm realizing there are two tricksters there, right? There's him trying to escape, deceive God, and then he lands himself in the unconscious in the mouth of a whale. Yeah. And then even again in the second half of that story, he does what he's told, and then he goes and waits outside of the city, hoping that God will bring death and destruction, hates the forgiveness aspect. And then God grows a vine, and then that vine is taken away, a kind of a trickster element.
Yes, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Flora, you had brought something up before. Did you want to say a little more about that? Because I don't think I had fully answered what you brought up originally.
Yeah. I think there's the concern. I understand that maybe if there are multiple lives and people work things out at some point, that's one way of looking at this. I know that there are ugly aspects to the trickster, as we all know.
Yes.
And we can be deceived and do harm, severe harm. And I'm afraid that we may be silver lining it a bit.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's such rich material as well. So I'm enjoying the redemptive aspect of the trickster as well.
Yeah, but you are reminding us that it can be harmful in our encounter. An encounter can be harmful, hurt us, even traumatize us. So it's still dangerous to work with unless you keep making as much of it conscious as you can. That's the secret of it. John?
Well, it just seems to me that just as in mythology, there's good magicians and bad magicians and maybe inexperienced, well-meaning but destructive magicians. The same thing could be said of tricksters. I mean, there may be, they cover a range. I mean,
yes,
Trump definitely fits the trickster archetype, hands down. He's the malignant one, and I can't think of. Well, the Marx Brothers is a good example of a benign one, as are many other of our wiser comedians. So, yeah, it's all over the map.
Yeah, and we remind ourselves that all the archetypes have the two sides, positive and negative. So the mother archetype on the one hand is the nurturant mother, and on the other hand is the witch mother, the one who ultimately, through how she causes you harm or abuse, toughens you up. But even though a transformation has happened and you become stronger in the long run, that doesn't take away from the fact that she still did harm and abuse you. So all the archetypes have both sides. And Trickster has more of the negative side than positive in most of our experience.
Would you say that when it's negative, it's almost always projected self-hatred?
Sometimes it could be that you're looking at your own self-loathing, but there are other times when someone comes along who hates you because you're you, and it isn't really a projection. And that person would be very dangerous. Like somebody who hates you for your religion or your national background or your economic status.
Well, that's usually their wounding projected onto you, though.
Yeah, they're projecting their
projected self-hatred.
Yeah, limitations and suffering, but it's still dangerous at our end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other final comments? Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for your attention, and I'm so glad I had a chance to do this.
Thank you, David. I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, David. So this concludes this month's meeting of the Analytical Psychology Club. Please join us on March 14th for Tina Stromstead. So thank you very much for coming.